Is Federal's new Hydro-Shok Deep 210 grain 45 ACP load any good, or is it a complete dumpster fire? We're going to find out. Hey everybody, welcome back to LocaCarnivore, the hunting, guns, and outdoor channel for smart people. And you're smart because you're watching us instead of some influencer who would do a PR spot for a cartel if the money was right. In order to make sure you don't miss out on any important information, stay with us through the entire video. There's good stuff throughout. Federal came out with their Hydro-Shok Deep line just a few years ago, and we finally got a hold of the 45 ACP load that they offer in this line. It's a 210 grain bullet as opposed to the standard 230 grain or somewhat still common 200 grain load. So Federal has been playing with bullet weights on a lot of their self-defense handgun loads, and the way they put it is that they're working on the optimum bullet weight without regards to what that might be. So if a 250 grain would do it or a 165 grain gets them the results, they don't care. They're just focused on what are the results. Hey, remember to give us a big like, subscribe to our channel, we'd appreciate it, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you'll get notified of every new video that we produce. So the Federal Hydro-Shok Deep, we tested it in a 5-inch barreled model 1911. Federal advertises the load at 980 feet per second, which is 448 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle, which is pretty good for 45 ACP. Typically you see 230 grain loads with energy in the about 350 to 390 range, foot-pounds range. So this is going a little hotter, basically because of the lighter bullet weight. The LocaCarnivore project gets funding from only one source at this point in time, and that's from you fine folks at our Patreon. So if you would go down to the link in the description and go over to Patreon, show us a little love there. Every dollar counts, and we'd appreciate it. So for you to understand how this bullet works, we need to give you a little short history lesson here about the Hydro-Shok bullet itself. The original Hydro-Shok load was developed in the 1980s by a gentleman named Tom Brzezinski. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. If you happen to be watching this, Tom, my apologies. You can always, of course, contact us and let us know how it is pronounced. At any rate, Mr. Brzezinski had developed a novel approach to designing a hollow point. Normally, you just have a, basically a cavity knocked into the bullet nose, and then when it hits flesh, let's be honest here, when it hits flesh, which is 90% water, it generally will fill up that cavity, provide some pressure, and then peel back the nose of the bullet, expanding, dumping some energy into the target, and dumps energy into the target and creates a wider wound track all the way through. Mr. Brzezinski came up with a really novel idea, which is based on sound engineering principles. He took that normal cavity and he designed a post right in the middle of it, which is very thin and very narrow. What that post does is, as flesh, which again is 90% water, so any fluid-based media, enters that cavity, that post forces that media out against the walls of the nose of the bullet and causing massive and very rapid expansion. So you get a very rapid energy dump into the target from this type of bullet. Now, and then Mr. Brzezinski sold either the rights or hopefully did a royalty licensing agreement with Federal, but somehow Federal got a hold of the design, rights to the design, and they started producing it. Roughly about 1988 or so is when the first loads were introduced, and specifically for the FBI. In fact, the Hydro-Shok was the FBI 10mm load, so it had a proven track record. There were a few problems though, as that round was used in the field and developed for other calibers, and then it was used a lot by a lot of law enforcement agencies over the years. But there was a couple of issues with it. First of all, it had a reputation for when it would hit clothing on an assailant that it would tend to plug up and you would not get it would tend to plug up and you would get very limited or even no expansion. So essentially you had a full metal jacket bullet going through your assailant with all the attendant problems that go with that. Hey, if you want more content, go over to LocaCarnivore's website. The link's down in the description. And while you're there, visit our LocaCarnivore store. Yeah, we got to do something to make a little bit of money. You can purchase some great LocaCarnivore branded merchandise and help out the channel. We'd appreciate it. Thank you. The other problem that the original Hydro-Shok had was that massive instant expansion, especially in calibers with larger bullet diameters such as 45, would cause the bullet to slow down very rapidly when it was transiting through flesh. And so you would not get very extensive penetration. Now the FBI load in 10 millimeter, now the FBI 10 millimeter load supposedly gave an optimal 16 inches on average penetration in gelatin. And I don't know if they were testing it with their full protocols that they developed over the years, you know, with the barriers and all that sort of stuff. But for them, supposedly this was an ideal round. However, in other loadings and in other situations used on the street, people were finding that the bullet just didn't have a really reliable deep penetration. So occasionally you would get shallow wounding, although dramatic wounding and very wide wounding. The wound cavity itself might be quite shallow. And that's not always the best thing, because it may not reach the vitals completely and it may not fully incapacitate somebody in a hurry. So what do you think about what we're saying here today about this Federal 210 grain Hydro-Shok Deep? What do you think of the load? Is it any better or any worse than anything else you've tried? Go down in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Tear it on up there and tell us what you think. So what's the difference between the original Hydro-Shok and this new Hydro-Shok Deep? So what they did was they looked at this, and instead of that very narrow post in the middle of the bullet, they went to a broad-based cone, sort of looks like a round pyramid, if you will. And what they found that did was it tended to push anything that got into the cavity out and still work on expanding. So even, you know, clothing or other barrier material would get in there. That wedge would essentially drive that product, that wedge would essentially drive all that material to the outside under pressure against the nose of the bullet, and it would expand it. They're pretty sure they solved that problem with that design. And on top of that, once the bullet opens up, that cone at the nose, that center cone, provides a sharper nose, which helps, even though the bullet's expanded, it helps increase that penetration. It helps push material tissue out of the way better, so that the penetration is deeper than you would expect with the normal Hydro-Shok. And as a bonus, Federal claims that the Hydro-Shok Deep meets all of the NIJ, National Institute of Justice, test protocols for law enforcement ammunition. So you as a civilian carrier, if you want to carry this, very good load in the sense that it's supposed to meet all of the law enforcement criteria. Now today's video is not a full review of the 210 grain Federal Hydro-Shok Deep load, so we're not going to chrono this, we're not going to do accuracy tests, anything like that. All we're doing today is testing what happens when this meets ballistic gel, and we're using clear Ballistics brand gelatin, of course, like everybody else. However, we keep it at the correct temperature, and a lot of people don't. They're out there in the Arizona sun when it's 100 degrees, or they're out there obviously in the snow or wherever in, I don't care, Iowa, wherever it might be, and you can tell it's below freezing, or Alaska especially, and that's too cold. So this gel is supposed to, according to Ballistics gelatin, be kept at a temperature between about 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit for optimal results and predictable results. Now, if you're interested in why we're not going to chronograph the load, there's a link down in the description. You can go watch our video that geeks out about why we don't chronograph ballistics, why we don't chronograph ballistic gel tests. Today, we're testing the 210 grain Hydro-Shok Deep against our Frost Giant Extreme Gel Test fixture. And what that is, in simple math, is it simulates a cross-torso shot, which is the nightmare shot from the FBI's shootout in 1986. You can go read all about that elsewhere. But it simulates that cross-torso shot going through the arm tissue and into the torso, and it simulates this on a very large statured individual like you might find in the northern latitudes typically, and somebody who's wearing real winter clothing, not what the FBI test calls heavy clothing, which is just ridiculous. If you've ever been to Fargo in January, you'll know what I'm saying. Nobody wears, you know, just a leather jacket and a t-shirt if you're going to be outside for any length of time. So what we have is a proper package of clothing that simulates all the layers of clothing, including the heavy insulation that you would find on somebody in true winter conditions. And then we put a pack on the outside of a sideways gel block, and that sideways gel block is the arm tissue, if you will. And then we have clothing packages on the inside, for the inside of the sleeve, and then the clothing package that would be covering the torso. So you get a double clothing package in between the arm block, and then we have the torso block, which is lengthwise. And we've got a link down to the video all about the Frost Giant, so if you want to go geek out on that, you can do that too. But in sum total, that's what this test does. All right, enough of the preliminaries and everything. I'm sure you want to see the gel test. Now, the conditions we had out there on the range were, the temperature was about 68 degrees or so, and the block temperature was about the same roughly. And as we said, we shot it out of a 5-inch 1911, specifically a mil-spec by Springfield Armory, if you need to know about that. So let's go down to our clandestine alpine test facility at the sprawling LocaCarnivore headquarters and see how this bullet did against our frost giant. Looked like a good hit. There's the gun. All right, there's the track right there. There's the bullet came to rest. Track through, very nice initial expansion, temporary cavity, limited expansion after it got through the second clothing pack. All in all, a very good shot. And here we have Hydro-Shok Deep. It's very similar to the other Hydro-Shoks in different calibers. That's the 45 ACP 210 grain. Hydro-Shok Deep, very similar. They all seem to perform this way, and it's very similar to the gold dot. And just to show you, and give you a better view of that 45 ACP wound track from the 210 grain Federal Hydro-Shok Deep load. We brought the block in from outside so we don't have that glaring sun. We're in our award-winning research laboratories here at the clandestine alpine test facility located at the sprawling LocaCarnivore headquarters complex. And this is the wound track I'm referring to. Comes straight in. There's the slug. We'll dig these out a little later. See if we can get you in there a little closer. And it's pretty predictable. There is, however, a bit of a secondary temporary stretch cavity that was developed by the bullet. Not dramatic, but it's there, and then it goes to caliber before it stops. Here we have the 45 ACP 210 grain Federal Hydro-Shok that we recovered from the gel. This thing is just absolutely textbook what Federal says this is supposed to do. That new post design just allows that thing to open up. You can see there's no appreciable material. It tried to stick some of the cloth onto there, and that's a little bit of gel, but otherwise it did not plug up the hollow point cavity. Massive expansion, really ragged. These sharp petals that peel back cause additional lacerations in the tissue, which causes further incapacitation and bleeding. Fantastic bullet performance. Well, that was a pretty interesting test. I was really surprised and in some respects pleased how the Federal 210 grain Hydro-Shok Deep performed. It opened up marvelously, as you saw. Fantastic expansion, and that frontal cone did its job. It stayed intact. It doesn't mush down or anything, because the old Hydro-Shok, that center post after the bullet expands, sometimes it would like hammer down or get bent over or whatever, and that could lead to, you know, it going off course or whatever. It just was introduced a element of uncertainty into the bullet trajectory and performance. So that wedge-shaped cone that the Federal developed really seems to help quite a bit in that respect. And that 6.75-inch penetration into the torso was about almost 3 inches less than what we got, say, with the 170 grain Winchester USA Ready to Defend 10mm load, and we'll have a link down there in the description. You can go check out that video if you want. However, for a serious winter carry load, again, against a large statured individual wearing very heavy clothing on that cross torso shot, we'd have to rate this around the 210 grain Federal Hydro-Shok Deep as marginal to just maybe on the edge of acceptable. Now, on a frontal shot with somebody facing you, or your assailant facing you, this thing would be spot on. And the nice thing is you would probably not have an excessive risk or concern of over-penetration with this round. So from that perspective, it's good. However, keep in mind, if you're going to carry this round, On that extreme, you know, maybe 2% of possible shots you might have to do to defend your life, it may come up a little bit short, so you need to keep that in mind. We hope you got some valuable information today out of our video, and we thank you once again for spending your valuable time here with us. And remember, as always, stay safe, stay aware, be kind to people, and don't run with scissors and do everything your mom told you to do. It was developed by a name... The original Hydro-Shok load was developed